You know, people are always trying to put facial recognition, where are you? There we go. Trying to put God in a box. Have you noticed? We see it in the readings today, and Samuel, David, the great hero chosen by God, has won lots of battles, has survived Saul trying to kill him. And he says, boy, it's time to give thanks to God, so let's build a house for God. Now, if you'd been in the weekly Exodus Bible study, you would know that in around chapter 30-something or other, purportedly the voice of God had told the Israelites, the priestly class, or the artisans who were helping the priestly class, to build an Ark of the Covenant, a box that had various feet to it, and two hand-like things sitting on the top of it, and God's presence would sit, unseen of course, in those hands, as if something was holding up God. And they had to carry this ark wherever they went, to various battles or to their new homes or villages that they were staying in. And God lived with them. Well, now David, of course, is thinking, I live in a nice home now. I'm no longer wandering around in a tent. And so God should have a house. And he tells Nathan, and Nathan says, good, go ahead. Sounds like a good idea. I'm sure God wants you to do that. And then God speaks to Nathan, saying, go tell David, when did I ever say, build me a house? Did I tell you to build me a house? I've been in your tents and tabernacles with you. You've been homeless, roaming, and I have guarded you all this time. I'm going to give you a home. You don't give me a home. It's odd that people would think we could build a house for God, not a house of God, but a house for God, because we want to put God in a box, whether it's the God of our religion, the God of the Christians versus the God of the Jews or the Muslims or the Sikhs or the Hindus, or the God of the dominant nation. You know, God's only speaking to the Russian Orthodox, not to the Episcopalians. Really? We create boxes for God. The one true God is with us, living with us in the little box that we've created. And over again, God says, you don't create a home for me. I create a home for you. Remember when Peter and James and John are invited up in the mountain on the story of the Transfiguration, and they see a vision of Jesus and Moses and Elijah, the great prophets, the great Jewish heroes. And Peter is so excited and overwhelmed, and as usual, he leaps to the wrong conclusion and says, let me build tents, let us build homes, tents for you and Moses and Elijah. And even as he's uttering the idea, God interrupts him and says, this is my son. That's all you need to know. This is my son. In the book of Ephesians, Paul or the writer of the Ephesians, is talking about homes and homelessness. And he says, you have been without a home, you Gentiles. Physically, geographically speaking, the Jews and the Gentiles have politically had their world taken away from them by the Roman Empire. But the Gentiles were also outside the walls that the Jews had built. They weren't allowed to associate with Jews, to live in the same villages, to go into their temples. And now, those people who are choosing to follow Christ, the ones who are Jewish, are saying, what's going on? Why are these Gentiles saying that the Holy Spirit has come to him? And the writer says, you Gentiles, you have been put into a new box. It's a bigger box. It's a different box. But I'm giving you a home. You who have been sojourners, homeless, you now have a home. And it's not a village. It's not a building. It's not a new kind of church. It's Christ as your foundation, you all as members of the same family, and God makes that home for you. And it says it will be a dwelling place of God. That doesn't mean we made a house for God. It means God is the home, and we are living inside the home that God made. And the writer walks about taking down the dividing walls between us, specifically at that time speaking about the dividing walls between Jews and Gentiles. But all sorts of other dividing walls were coming down. Eventually, the Temple of Jerusalem would be destroyed, and people would be dispersed. Now, when Ephesians talks about taking down dividing walls, it makes it sound like all dividing walls are bad. But in fact, From the beginning of humanity, human beings have sought dwelling places, whether they were caves or structures made from palm leaves or banana leaves, whether we live in a cave or in a cardboard box or a chateau. We have always needed home. We've always needed a place to live, and God has given us places to live. So God knew that David needed a house made of cedar. He knew that people needed places to live. He gave them places to live. So there's nothing wrong with those dividing walls. We need it for the safety of eating and loving and sleeping. We need our privacy, some kind of division between us and others, and protection from the elements of weather. Those divisions are good. And we have the kind of divisions among religions, between religions, among denominations. It seems like we have flavors or boxes that we like to go into, and there's nothing inherently wrong with them, as long as we don't claim that God is in our box and in nobody else's box, right? Because what does God say when you want to put him in a box? Don't put me in a box. You do not control me. I create the home for you. So, homes, places we live, home churches, buildings, these are all good things for all the reasons I mentioned. But there are a number of forces at work in the world that make homes very hard to keep. One of them are the various political things going on in the world. What makes people homeless? It's what happens in Syria or Myanmar or Guatemala or Mexico. People are driven out by criminal or governmental forces that don't want them to be there anymore. And so you see mass migrations throughout the world of people saying, we don't have a nation anymore. We have to go some other place, to some country, and see if they will let us in. It's a huge cause of actual homelessness. And we don't really want to deal with that. We say, wait, we've got our national border, and we're going to put a wall up, and I've got my home, and I don't want you in my home, and I don't want you coming around my church either, at least not when we're having church. Don't come around with your problems. We try to hide in our safe little oases, but they always come pressing against us in one way or another. Climate change is causing loss of homes now, not in the future, not in 20 years. It's always already causing the loss of homes due to mass flooding and wildfires throughout the world, including very close to us. You heard in the news about the number of Europeans who have lost their homes already due to the weird freak flooding that is happening in Europe. And so the weather elements will wipe out homes, and there's nothing we can do about it. Admit it, how many of you thought, I wonder where I could live where climate change couldn't get me, right? Would it be the mountains of Colorado? Would it be Alaska? Would it be the desert? Would it be Kentucky? Like, where could I go so that climate change won't get me? And as we figured out, you're all shaking your head, because if you watch the news, there is no place where climate change won't get us. There's always something threatening home. The high cost of living in San Diego has been all over the San Diego Union Tribune. 2 days ago, 2 stories about what the local government is trying to do to deal with the lack of affordable housing in San Diego, because the people who work here can't afford to live here. It's at a crisis proportion. There's also a serious problem with homelessness. Oh, the other story in the Union Tribune, and this should be very important to all of us here, UCSD students have a serious affordable housing shortage, that there are thousands of juniors and seniors who aren't going to get a dorm room and cannot find a place to live. And that is, my friends, literally across the street from us. 1 block away, thousands of people who don't have affordable housing. You'll be hearing more from our exploratory committee about how we hope to take care of that. And then, as we know, on an individual level, there are things that make other people lose their homes. So many people without homes in every city of this country, along every beach, every coast in the United States, people without homes. Last week on Monday, when I was on my very short jury duty term, Deanne and Chris met a man who was on our church campus, Paul, and he had been here before receiving food cards a few years ago in our office. And he came and asked them for help. He said he wanted to go home. And his home is in Arizona, but he hasn't been there for decades. Am I right, Deanne? It's been decades since he's been back to Arizona. And he has been unhoused for many years. He was a highly skilled mechanic working on all-electric buses and things like that. Lost his job, and that big misfortune caused a huge downward spiral in his life that he could not get out of. And he has been living on the streets for many, many years. And something in him just said, I can't do this anymore. I want to go home. So Deanne worked at finding his family, and then on Tuesday morning when I got back, we got in touch with his family on the phone, and we put Paul on a bus on Tuesday night to his family in Tucson. And his family in Tucson met him the next morning, 4 of his family members, a mother, uncle, sister, brother, to welcome him back. They said we had been looking for him for years. He found a home that had been waiting for him for years, and he just wasn't ready to go to it. So there are all sorts of things that keep us from actually having homes, or that may drive us to homelessness ourselves someday when the wildfire or the typhoon sweeps through San Diego. Who knows? It's very tempting to, when we think of these big forces, to think that there's nothing we can do. And in fact, when I was reading commentaries about all of these readings, the Samuel reading and the Ephesians reading, it was basically talking about how there's nothing we can do to bring about peace in the world. There never will be peace. And they quote that phrase from Ephesians, Christ is our peace. Well, I agree with that. But I don't think Jesus would ever let me interpret that as saying, so I don't need to do anything. Right? Famous teaching from the Talmud, famous Jewish teaching is you can't do everything, but you've got to do something. You've got to fix what you can fix. So we can bring about some peace, some home now and then for somebody, some new box for somebody when they don't have a box to be in anymore. We can do that. But ultimately, we are out of control of forces in the world. We don't control them. And ultimately, the scriptures are right, that God makes home for us. We're not going to make a home for God, and we're probably not going to fix the world, not tomorrow anyway. So how do we be at home with God? How do we live with God? It's not just coming to this building, right? How do we do that? I think that one of the ways we can do that is look at the dividing walls that we have with other people and recognize that most of those are not God-made, but are made by us. The dividing line between those who are unhoused and those of us who have great homes to live in feels real to us. We don't want to quite deal with that. I can't deal with all those tents on National Avenue or Imperial Avenue. There's all those people. What are we going to do? But there are people dealing with that. I can't deal with the lack of affordable housing for UCSD students, but there are people working on that. To challenge ourselves when we see a dividing wall between religions, to say maybe I can have a bigger heart for Muslims or Hindus. Maybe I have a bigger heart for mentally ill people, because one of the dividing walls in our life is between the mentally ill and what I call the mentally better. We're all on that spectrum, right? What keeps us from tipping over the edge? I don't know, whatever edge we think is there. But there is that dividing wall. And all I know is that when we look at the dividing walls in our lives and start to remove those walls, all of a sudden we start to see ourselves in that bigger home that God has created. The only way that I see that I'm dwelling with God is when God makes me get closer to somebody I could not get close to before. For whatever reason, even if we weren't intentionally staying apart, somehow they burst through the wall, or I remove the division, and all of a sudden, living with God. What we have to accept is that it's God who puts us in boxes. We don't create the boxes for God. And more importantly, that God repackages us all the time. And that when you think you're in this box and it's a really good box and I love my gold wrapping paper, God is going to burst that open and put you in a big Amazon carton with a bunch of people you didn't think you were going to get shipped with. And that is the dwelling place of God. Welcome home.